frustrating than waiting on something is waiting on something with no idea why you're waiting. It's also really frustrating to lose your computer in the middle of a sermon, but that's pretty standard for me as well. It's really frustrating to be waiting on something with no idea why you're waiting, and then for no reason that you can possibly understand, the wait comes to an end and everything moves really fast. Let me just give you an example of this. You're sitting in traffic, and you have no idea why. There's no wreck on Waze, and of course you're driving with Waze pulled up. You got it pulled up, and there's no wreck on there. You have no idea why you're sitting there, and you sit there for 10 minutes, you sit there for 20 minutes, and all of a sudden, traffic begins to move, and there's no indication of why. And for me personally, maybe this is just me, maybe you're all better than me, it's probably true. For me, the moving with no indication of why we're moving now is as frustrating as the wait. Because if there's no reason for us to be moving now that's different than what it was before, then we could have been doing this the whole time, right? We could have been doing this the whole time. But because somebody saw a squirrel, we're all sitting here for whatever reason. Maybe you're waiting on something and you're waiting on buying a house. You got people that are buying houses all the time. I had some friends in Texas, they were buying a house and they lived about 4 hours away from where they were trying to move. And their realtor would call and say, hey, there's a house for sale that fits your specifications. So they'd get in the car and they would drive for 2 hours. And on the way there, they would get a call and said, hey, the house sold already. So they would turn around and drive back, and it got to the point that they were just staying 4 hours away from home, waiting until the moment that they could get a house. And when they finally got one, it was because they just showed up and handed them a check and said, please, we're not even going to finish looking at the house. Here's a check. Let's move forward. The waiting is fine, right? To say you're waiting on a baby to be born, you understand why you're waiting. But when you're waiting and you have no idea why, it's incredibly frustrating. Even when it's when God you're dealing with. There's been a lot of times that I've waited on God to do things. Like, this would be super simple. You could resolve this immediately, quickly, with no problems. It would benefit you. It would benefit everybody. But you're waiting, God, and I don't understand why. Why? Why are we waiting? What are we waiting on? And then when it finally comes time, it's like everything moves so fast. And you can be grateful or you can be frustrated, and I'll waffle between the two. But we're looking, as we wrap up our Waiting on Christmas series, and you say, Ben, I'm over Christmas. I'm done with Christmas. Well, this actually happens after Christmas, and it bothers me that we combine it with Christmas, so I'm doing this on purpose. As we look at this final story, we've been looking at people who are waiting on Christmas, a lot of them not even knowing that that's what they're waiting on. Zechariah and Elizabeth waiting on the birth of a son for their entire lives, but God was delaying that until just the right moment, and they were waiting on Christmas. We got Mary and Joseph that are ready to start their lives. They're ready to go out as a couple and do all these things that young couples dream of. And then God says, no, you're going to wait because I got something else that you're going to do. You're going to wait on those dreams until I've accomplished my purpose here. We look at Mary and Joseph having to travel last week right at the end of a pregnancy. 8 months and 3 weeks into a pregnancy, they go on a week-long trip. We say, why is this happening? We see how God brought together these people that would have no way to know about what was happening if they had not been forced to wait and endure that. And now we're at the last story. And where we're at in Matthew chapter 2 is where we're going to spend today. Where we're at in Matthew chapter 2, if you read the Bible stories and you sing the songs, Mary and Joseph there's a barn, a drummer shows up, it's a whole chaotic thing, and then you just kind of assume they go home. But there's a whole sequence of events that happens after this, but it all begins with another wait. Because they're there in Bethlehem, and we pick up in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. It says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. We don't know how long that they were waiting, but we get this idea like, okay, they moved on pretty quick. But at the end of this story, and I don't mind spoiling it because you all know this story already, at the end of this story, we're going to find out the amount of time that the wise men have been watching the star is 2 years. That's how long they've been watching this star. So the assumption is that Jesus is 2 years old or less at this point. Okay, maybe he's 3 months. Maybe he's 6 months. Maybe he's a year and a half. Maybe he's 2 years old. However old he is at this point, they have been waiting at a place that is not their home for a long period of time. And why is that? Why are they waiting? Well, we don't know. We don't know. We can speculate and say, okay, they traveled to Bethlehem. She gave birth. You don't want to travel with an infant, so you stay there for a while. Then you run out of money. Then you got to work to save up enough money to be able to get back and make the trip back. Well, maybe they felt like God was leading them to stay there. Maybe they were trying to let things cool down back at home after the surprise pregnancy situation that everybody was talking about. We don't know why they waited, but they were waiting in a place that was not their home for something. And that's the way it is for us a lot of times. We don't know how long we're going to wait. We don't even really know what it is that we're waiting on. But God has got us in a situation of tension, a situation of pain, a situation of discomfort. And we're waiting on God to just do something. And that's where we find them. And we sing these songs and we know these stories so well that we don't even pay attention to how strange some of these things are that happen in this story. But this is really strange in this part of the story, because we think about the Christmas story being Mary, Joseph, Jesus, and then side players. But Mary, Joseph, and Jesus have just like little small verses about them, and there's all these other people. We got shepherds that show up that are not related to the story at all, but God brings them into the story. I'm like, why are these guys here? And in today's story, we have two incredibly important characters in world history, in world politics at the time, that enter into this story for a moment and then exit. I'm like, why did they just show up here? Why are they here in this story? And I want to talk to you about that just a little bit to help you understand what God's doing here. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. Now, we get confused about all of our Herods because we got Herod that's here and we got Herod that's later. And if you start looking at Herod, there's a bunch of other Herods. You go to Acts, there's even a Herodias. It gets really confusing. But this guy is the one that started it all. Okay, this is the guy known as Herod the Great, and we'll talk about him for just a minute. But he is the king over all this region. He's there. And wise men from the east come to Jerusalem, and we really don't know anything about them. You assume there's three. You look at the nativity sets, and they're wearing turbans. But what's important about these guys is that they're actually pretty significant characters, and we have a good idea about who they are. So the word that's used here is magi. It's the wise men that were there. And they were religious and political advisors to the kings of Persia for a long time. And at this point, they're advisors to the emperor of the Parthian Empire, the guy that's in charge of that. So if you'll go onto that map, I just want to show you things. We think about things from a Western perspective. In our minds, there's Rome, and Rome ruled the world. But that's not what's going on here. Everything in red right here is Roman territory. Everything in yellow is the Parthian Empire, which is about the same size of what Rome has got going on. We're just Western-centric, so we think about that. Right in the middle of that, where that white arrow is where our story is taking place. And this piece of land right here that the arrow is pointing at was a piece of land that the Parthians and the Romans fought over back and forth. Because it was right there. It was a bridge between the two parts of the Roman Empire. It was a seaport onto the Mediterranean Sea, and they would fight over it. So you've got these people, you've got the Romans, you've got the Parthians, and these magi show up. And you're like, okay, wise people, like people that are really good at stuff show up. No, wise men, magi, are the primary religious and political advisors to the guy that's in charge of all the yellow. If you think back to the story about Daniel, you think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if you read through those stories and you remember those, they were always talking to the wise men. They were talking to these people that were advisors to the king. Daniel ended up in charge of them quite a bit. There were multiple periods of time that Daniel, who was a Jewish guy, was in charge of all the wise men in Babylon. He was in charge of all the wise men in Persia, depending on what point of the history is. And that idea carried through. These people that were advisors to these emperors comes all the way through. So what happens is you've got these people that are not Jews but have been heavily influenced by the Jewish dispersion over into Babylon. They're heavily influenced by what Daniel taught them about prophecy and about the Messiah and all that was to come. You've got them influenced, and they've mixed that together with astrology that they practiced, and God used that to indicate to them when the Messiah was going to be born. Now, does that mean astrology is valid because of that? No, it means God can use any terrible thing he feels like using. It doesn't matter how dumb it is. He can use it. But he used this to bring them over. And it's like, okay, these wise people come and acknowledge him. Except that it's not just that. Because King Herod is really disturbed when the next level down from the emperor of Rome's primary adversary at this time sends a delegation to his town and says, we've heard there's a new king that's been born. It really bothers Herod because this is an international incident between two major world powers. And they're just acting on their own, but Herod doesn't believe that. He believes something else is going on. What else is disturbing for them besides the international aspect of it and just you've got these two groups of people is how Herod came into power himself. Herod is not a royal guy. He is not from a line of kings. His dad was a bureaucrat. He was the head financial officer for Rome in this region. And the reason he got that is because he participated in a rebellion against another king that was reigning over here. So he participated in that rebellion, and then he managed to take over, was second in the kingdom. His dad was second in the kingdom. And then the Parthians over here financed the nephew of the previous king to come back and take over that land. So Herod, his dad, was killed, and Herod managed to escape and go back to Rome after the Parthians came in and took over. So he goes back to Rome and says, Rome, I need some help. I need some help to take this land back for you because we're generating a lot of taxes. How can you help me to get this back? And Rome is so tired of dealing with this little strip of land that they do something absolutely unprecedented, something that they never did again. It was a strange thing that they did. What they would do is they would put people in charge of areas that were still subject to Rome. They would limit their power. They divided up and do that. But they didn't do that with Herod. Here's what they said to Herod. He went back to the Roman Senate, and they said, you're not a king. You're not from a royal line, but we're tired of dealing with this. So if you can go and get this land and keep it for us and turn in tax revenue, we're going to do something unprecedented. We're going to make you a limitless king over this area. The only one you'll be subject to is the emperor. You can do whatever you want to as long as you pay taxes and are subject to the emperor. You can do whatever you want to. And they gave him a special title that nobody had ever had before. Anybody guess what that title was? They gave him the title, the Roman Senate gave this guy who was not king, the special title, King of the Jews. Never been used before. Never in history has that term existed. And the Roman Senate voted, you, Herod, bureaucrat that's kind of wormed your way up, are now the King of the Jews. The Jews hated that because he wasn't Jewish. He was converted to Judaism, but he wasn't really a Jew. He didn't practice the religion. They hated him. But Rome loved him because he paid the taxes. So they give him the title, King of the Jews, and he goes back and he conquers this land. Now, 30 years later, after he's conquered this land, what happens? Ambassadors from the Parthian Empire and say, hey, we've heard that a new King of the Jews has been born, and we would like to see him. Could you tell us where he is? Herod panics. Because, first of all, there's the Messiah. The Messiah is supposed to be descended from David, and Herod's not even descended from a Jew. So he's not going to fit in that. He sees international forces coming in on his territory, and his people are going to now be, his territory, he doesn't care about the people, are now going to be a hotbed for war as far as he's concerned between Rome and Parthia again. And the last time his dad was killed and his brother was killed during that. So he says, what am I going to do here? Because not only am I not the rightful king, not only is there going to be another war, but now they're using my title that's never existed before to describe some baby that's just been born. Not only is he upset, but the people in Jerusalem are upset. Why? Well, they have been the battleground between two empires twice in the last 30 years. And here's the deal. No matter who wins in those fights, they lose. Because the empires don't care about them at all. And now they say, okay, the Parthians are moving on this territory again, and we are going to be in the middle of a war. Our kids are going to die. We're going to run out of food. They're going to burn down our houses and destroy our businesses again. And they're greatly troubled because of all of this. But then you've got a third element that's greatly troubled about this, and that's not Herod, who's worried about his throne. It's not the leaders of Jerusalem who are worried about the next war that is to come, but you've got the people who have been left behind between these two wars. The people who are waiting on a Messiah that will come and rescue them, who will reestablish the throne of David and bring about justice to them. And they are troubled, but they're troubled in a very different way. They're troubled because they're excited, because their wait is coming to an end. So the emissaries from the Parthian Empire come over and say, where is he who's been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. And when Herod heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. So in verse 4, he sends the ambassadors from the Parthian Empire away, gives them a nice place to stay so they can go over there while he figures this out. And he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Now, if you knew where the Messiah was going to be born, what would you do? Like, I'd be watching. Like, let's keep a record of all the babies that are being churned out of this place, because it seems like one of these is going to be special. We know he's going to be born there. What do we do? They weren't doing that. But he called them all together and said, where is he going to be born? And they said, the prophet Micah said that he was going to be born in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. He said, it's going to be born in Bethlehem. We know where he's going to be born. Again, I would be keeping track of that, but they didn't. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. And after listening to the king, they went on their way. He brings them back and says, hey guys, I also would like to worship my new rival for power. If you would, please let me know where he lives. An address would be great. Let me know where he lives so I can come and worship him as well. So they left. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. So God uses astrology again for the last time ever. Don't believe in it. The last time ever, God uses astrology again to lead them right to the right place. And they go in. And in the nativity and in your mind, Jesus is a baby. They're shepherds. The drummer, and then the wise men come in. But Jesus is up to 2 years old, okay? Christmas is over. Christmas is done. And Jesus is up to 2 years old. Mary is staying with somebody. Maybe they've rented a place temporarily. They're staying at Mary just for staying with somebody. He's at work. And then as she and her toddler are hanging out in the house, a delegation from the Parthian Empire comes inside to spend some time with her. And can you imagine, like, you're staying at home with the kids and you're hoping nobody knocks on the door and comes in and sees how big of a mess the house is? And you're like, I don't have anything ready, and you're not there. And then you open the door and you're still in your pajamas and the house is a mess, and ambassadors from the Parthian Empire are asking if they can come in and see your kid. Like, this is a big deal for Mary. I think it's kind of funny. They walk in and they see him. And in verse 11, they go into the house and they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. And then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. We can do a whole sermon about the significance of these three gifts, but I just want to sum it up because that's not what I'm talking about today. Gold is a gift given to kings. It's wealth, obviously. But if you read through the Old Testament, you read through 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Samuel, you read through Chronicles, what they're constantly doing is they're giving gold to the king. Or whenever the king has another king that's coming along that's stronger than him and threatening him, he gives him gold. This is a gift for a king. They give him gold. They give him frankincense. Anybody know what frankincense is? You got your essential oils kit at home that you're using to cure all your diseases. You got frankincense. Frankincense is a spice that's used as an incense. So it's a thing that's burned. And what it's representative of is of prayers going up. So they give him this gift fit for a king. They give him a gift that represents the prayers of people going up to God. And then they give him myrrh. Myrrh is a spice, but it's mainly a burial spice. And that one of my favorite points of the Easter story is when the two guys go to bury Jesus and they don't take any women with them who know what they're doing, and they take 75 pounds of spices with them. Largely, this is myrrh that they take with them to take care of the body. So they show up and give your toddler gold, incense, and burial spices. They opened their treasures. They offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then they spent the night. Being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Can we just stop and talk about how strange this story is? Like, why is this here? Like, can you imagine I'm telling you my life story? Like, and we had this kid, and then we had another kid, and then one day ambassadors from Russia came to our house, and they gave us presents, and then they caused an international incident with the local government, and then they left. And then I continue on with my story. Do you realize how strange that is? That they're involved in this story at all? And you got to wonder why. Why, God, are you doing this? Why are you making them stay in Bethlehem for whatever reason? We don't know what the reason is. Why are they having to stay in Bethlehem? Why are they having to wait? Why are you causing an international incident that brings attention to Jesus as a less than 2-year-old that is going to cause the Roman king of the area to try to kill him, and by killing him, because he can't figure out where he lives, kill every boy under 2 in the region? Why are you doing this? Why are you allowing this? Why are you making this happen? Why is traffic moving now when it's been sitting still for all this time? I don't understand. Why is this here? Maybe you've been waiting on God to do something. You're like, God, you could do this really easily. And I don't understand any of the things that you're doing around this story, but then you bring something really strange into my life, and I still don't understand what it is that you're doing here. That's where Mary and Joseph are. They're waiting, and they're waiting, and waiting, and God is doing all kinds of stuff, but it's nothing that seems to help them. And after up to 2 years of waiting, up to 2 years where nothing is happening, God decides it's time to move. In verse 13, when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. Man, we go from like mom and dad, little kid, teaching him to walk, to you better run to another country that you've never been to and where you don't speak the language, because the king of this area is going to kill your son if you don't go. Like, we change speeds real fast. When they had departed, we already read that part. In verse 14, he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I call my son. And then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. And that's the story. Now, we can talk about Herod and what he did. We can talk about the killing of the children. We can talk about the fulfillment of the prophecy. But that's not what we're talking about today. And I'm trying to make my sermon shorter, so we're not going to get into all the things I want to talk about. Instead, what I want to focus on today is the fact that some of you are in the middle of a wait and you do not understand what God is waiting on. You're sitting in traffic, there's no wreck up there, but no one is moving, and you have no idea why. And I just want to point out to you what God did with their wait and maybe what he's doing in your wait. The first thing that God did with their wait is he told people about Jesus with their wait. You realize that God fulfilled 3 different prophecies that are hundreds of years old in this wait. See, they've been waiting for 2 years or less, and they think that's a long wait. But God has been waiting for hundreds of years in order to fulfill this prophecy. And when the time comes, he fulfills 3 right after another. And in the wait, what he does is he lets everyone around know about Jesus. Because what happens in Jerusalem? Well, we've got these Parthian ambassadors come in. Do you think anybody else would have known what was going on in Herod's kingdom if the Parthian ambassadors hadn't come in? You think the regular people of Jerusalem would have known what was going on if there had not been an international incident caused? Maybe they don't know what he's talking about. You know, Herod's secretary's not putting out a newsletter like, this is what happened in Herod's courtroom today. But instead, what happens is they see a delegation from the Parthian Empire with wealth and soldiers to protect them coming in and meeting with Herod. And everybody says, I'm going to stop what I'm doing and I'd like to find out what's happening. I'd like to know what's happening here. And God sets things up and uses their weight to make sure that all of Jerusalem knows that they're there because the Messiah has been born. God uses their weight to tell people about Jesus. And when they make their trip down from Jerusalem to Bethlehem with their soldiers and with their camels and with all the things that come along, they come into this little bitty town. This little bitty town that less than 2 years ago heard the stories of the shepherds about how the angels appeared and said, this is the Messiah. This is the one that you've been waiting for. This is the one that I'm here to rescue you with. And as people in this town have lived for 2 years or less with this baby and with this family that God has said so much about, they had their 2 years of waiting. Their 2 years of, please, God, let this be over. Their 2 years of, when can we go back home? Their 2 years of waiting, why is God doing nothing? And in those 2 years, though it seems to them that God is doing nothing, God is laying the groundwork for thousands of people to find out about the Messiah in a way that would not have happened otherwise. And you're waiting on God to move. You're waiting on God to act. You're saying, God, this would be so easy if you would just, and I'll give you the plans. You don't even think about it. I'll tell you what to do. I'll tell you how to do this. It's really easy. It'll be good for you. It'll be good for me. It'll be good for everybody. Just do it. And you say, why is God not moving? And I want to offer you the possibility that the reason God is not moving is because He is using your wait to tell as many people as possible about Him. Clay and Myra are in the hospital right now. Myra's in the hospital. Clay's there with her. They're in the hospital right now. And you know what they're doing as the nurses come in, as they spend time with these nurses, as they spend time with these doctors? As she was supposed to go home 2 days ago, and now it's been delayed for a day and for another day because of things that will probably go away as soon as she's out. Do you know what God has been doing in that time? Clay got a chance to talk to and pray with the doctor that's doing her surgery that's come in every day. They've got a chance to talk to the nurses that have come in, the techs that have come in. And I'm sitting there with them and they're like, hey, have you met this person? This is what they did. This is where they're from. This is what we talked to them about. As they're coming in, and though they don't want to be there, and though it's painful to stay in that situation, God is using that situation to tell other people about Him. And maybe that's what God is using in your situation. We say, well, it's not for me because I ain't telling anybody about Jesus. I'm so mad at God, I'm not telling anybody about Jesus. Maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe that's the reason that the wait is lasting so long, is because God has something that He wants to accomplish through this. He has someone He wants to tell about this, and you are delaying the end of the wait because you're so mad that you're delaying what it is that He's trying to do in the people around you. Can you imagine Mary and Joseph and how their attitude impacted what people thought about the Messiah? If they're angry with God about the delay, they're angry with God about what He's waiting on, they're angry with God because He just won't move. Like, man, I don't know that I want to hang out with the Messiah's family. Those people are cranky. I don't want to be with them. I'm like, God, just take me home. Just get me out of this place, a place that those people live in and love. And God has left them there. And if they're cranky the whole time, they're angry with God the entire time, they delay what it is that He's trying to do, if not, make it impossible. If you're waiting on God to move, you're waiting on God to act, I want to ask you a question. Is your wait worth it if what God is doing with your wait is bringing other people to know Him? And is your wait as long as it is because you are making it as long as it is by the way that you're responding to God in the wait? What else did God do in the wait? You know, He never left them alone in the wait, but He used their wait to provide for them. He said, I've got you in a dangerous place. I've got you in a dangerous situation. Because Herod would have had this same reaction whether the Parthians had come or not. If Herod just found out, hey, these shepherds saw angels in the sky and they said the Messiah was born, Herod would have had the exact same reaction. And God kept them in danger. He kept them in a position of danger. But throughout that danger, He provided for them and cared for them. Because He didn't leave them alone in the wait, but took care of them. Joseph was able to work somehow and get some food. Joseph was able to take care of all of this. But when the time came, what happens? The Parthian delegates show up, and what do they got? A bunch of stuff that a baby can't use. But do you know who can use it? A couple that's about to take a trip to Egypt. In a place that they don't know the language, a place that it will be difficult for them to work, a place that they have nowhere to live. God has just provided for them at the end of the wait everything they need to take care of them until they can come home. God did not leave them in the wait. He did not forsake them in the wait. Though He was using the wait, He took care of them all the way through. And the day before they're about to go on an international long-term vacation, He sends them all the wealth that they will need to take care of them plus more. If God has you waiting, I just want to ask you a question. You're frustrated with God that He's leaving you in the wait. You're frustrated with God that He's not just snapping His fingers and ending this. You're frustrated with this. Let me ask you a question. Has He been faithful to you in the wait? There's not very many of us that look like we're missing meals. God has been providing for us. God has been taking care of us. And maybe it's not the way you want to. But has God been faithful in the wait? You say, God, I want you to be faithful by it being over. I want you to be faithful by ending it. I want you to be faithful by snapping your fingers. And that's not how He does things until He's ready to. But He was faithful in the wait and provided for them until the time it was time for them to move. And then when it was time for them to move, He gave them everything that they would need for the move. You're frustrated with God. Let me ask you this. Has He been faithful? And the answer is yes. God protected them during the wait. At any point, Herod could have come down and destroyed them. He could have come down and done that, but God kept them secret. He kept them safe. He kept them in a place that nobody would know about them, a place that even though the shepherds were talking about this, it didn't make it to Jerusalem until the moment was right. And when the moment was right, God turned the heat way up. Danger went way up. But He didn't leave them in danger any longer than He had to. He cared for them while they were in danger, and as soon as the time was right, He moved them out of danger. And you say, I'm frustrated with the wait because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay my bills tomorrow. I don't know if we're going to be able to eat tomorrow. I don't know if we're going to lose our house tomorrow. I don't know how this is going to work out tomorrow. But God has been faithful today, and He will be faithful tomorrow. And the moment that His purpose is accomplished, He will move you out of that danger. But until then, He will care for you in that danger. Finally, God ended the wait when He had accomplished His purpose. You are in the middle of a wait and you say, I'm frustrated and I'm angry because God can snap His fingers and it could all be over. But God does not leave you in there because He enjoys the drama of your situation. But He allows you to be in the wait because He has a purpose in the wait. And as soon as that wait is over, as soon as He's accomplished what He wants to, He will snap His fingers and move you out of the wait. Have you been there? Have you seen that? Where you're in a situation and you don't know what to do 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 and all of a sudden it's over and it's a story you tell. That's what's happened here. God left them in a wait until the time was right for the wait to end because He'd accomplished His purpose. And God has a purpose that He wants to accomplish through your wait. Maybe the purpose is in you. Maybe it's you softening your heart towards Him that you're willing to follow Him. Maybe it's the fact that there are people around you that He's waiting on you to share the gospel with through your situation, and you won't get an opportunity to do it if it's not through this situation. So He leaves you in it until that moment, and you're stamping your foot and saying, no, I'm not going to because I'm mad at God right now. And you delay the wait. And maybe it's just that you've got to endure until that moment because it takes 2 years for people to get from Parthia over here to you. And the wait is only lasting as long as it is because that's how long it takes. God has not forgotten you, but He's been faithful to you. God is not ignoring you, but He's using you. And you can do one of two things in the wait. You can celebrate how God is taking care of you and work with Him, or you can get angry and frustrated and waste the wait. He can be trusted with the wait. Can you? Can you be trusted with the wait? Because as soon as they were done, God moved Mary and Joseph out of this situation. We don't hear from them until it's time to take Jesus to the temple. He used them for what He wanted to accomplish, and then He left them alone to take care of the child that He'd given them. He was faithful to them and will be faithful to you as He has been faithful to you. Will you be faithful in the wait? Because He can be trusted. It's us that are the problem. So you're frustrated, you're angry, you're waiting. You say, I don't know why traffic's not moving. Because there's no wreck ahead. I don't know what it is that God is trying to do. Because there's nothing that's delaying this that I can see. I don't know what God is doing. Today, He's given you options for some answers. So what will you do? Will you repent of the attitude that you've had? Will you repent of the fact that you have looked at this and the way that you've looked at this? Will you look at the fact that He has proven His love for you by sending His Son to die for you? He gave His Son, not waiting on you to be perfect, not waiting on you to have the best attitude, not waiting on you to get it exactly right, but He gave you His Son as an act of His own love and said that anyone who believes in Him and calls on His name would be saved as proof of His love for you. He has proven that He has been faithful. So will you call on Him today? Whether it's to say, I'm sorry that I have delayed this for so long and I want you to rescue me from the state I'm in. Whether it's to say, I am sorry for the way I've behaved during this wait while you have faithfully taken care of me. Or will you stay in your bitterness about the wait? Will you stay in your frustration about the wait? Will you continue to waste the wait? He has been faithful and will be faithful. Let's be faithful back. Would you stand with me as we pray? Our Heavenly Father, we come before you right now, and I'm so grateful that we have these stories that show us how it is that you have used others, how you were faithful to others, how you've taken care of others in the wait. And as I look at Mary and Joseph and the burden that you placed on them, Lord, I am so grateful that they were willing to bear it because you did so much through their wait. And Lord, I know as I look at this and I start to say I'm grateful that they were there, I also know that you use us in the exact same way. That you use our suffering, that you use our pain, that you use our weight just like you use theirs, if we'll allow you. And so I ask for forgiveness, Lord, that we don't seek that out, that we don't look at this as an opportunity. I ask forgiveness, Lord, and I also ask for help that we would be people who would not just be angry, not just be frustrated in the wait, but people who would cry out to you for rescue the first time, but also for rescue continually, that we would wait faithfully as you take care of us faithfully, Lord, and that you would use our suffering, our struggle, our wait to bring many to know you. I thank you. I thank you. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.